Hello, everybody. Today is a joint podcast between Remember Your Greatness and Your Quantum Life. I'm here with my lovely wife, Bonnie Piesse, sometimes known as Bonnie Piesse. And we are going to talk about Bonnie's awakening. So I just want to give you some quick background. If you've spent any time on my other podcast, WTF is on My Mind, or you've seen HBO's The Vow, or in 2017, 18 and 19, you were looking at the news about cults, you know our story was all over the media. And the one thing that, there were many things that The Vow didn't cover, but one of the things they didn't cover was how Bonnie figured out that we were in a cult, in a high control group, in a very, very bad organization, because most everybody else couldn't see it. And in 2016, she began seeing signs of it. And so I really wanted to talk, the two of us together, about Bonnie's awakening, how it started, what happened, because the entire cult came down because of her awareness. So that's going to be our chat today.
Triggered by that.
Triggered by that.
The whole thing. Yeah.
Triggered by that. You're right. Triggered by that. Well, some people call you the fire starter.
Yeah, I'll take that.
I call you the fire starter. So I think let's just start by going into like how you got to the place that you spent that amount of time with yourself to have this experience.
Okay, so I had been in a pretty low place because I'd been, gaslit for a year and a half or something by Nancy and Keith and, all the high ranks that were trying to enforce things. So I'd been feeling really bad. And then in 2016, I started to explore different ideas, like listening to spiritual podcasts and things. I started to kind of break the mental spell by opening my mind. And I noticed that in my journaling practice, I could actually, tune in and ask my higher self, or whatever you want to call it, a question. And then I would write out a response. And what I was writing was it was coming through as really wise and like beyond my small mind. So I had this conversation going with what feels like my higher self or my guides or whatever you want to call it. And that was really interesting to me. And in my meditations, I had found what I call an abyss. But the beginning of that was like I'd go into meditation and there was an empty space or a full space, however you want to see it. And every time I started to kind of go into that a little bit, it was like electric, like an electric wave or even an electric kind of shock. It was like, which now I kind of see as Kundalini. But every time I went into that space, it was like really, really intense. But there was this abyss or this kind of void. And I started talking to a friend about it who actually was in the cult, but she was a bit more kind of exposed to other stuff. And she'd been listening to Eckhart Tolle and everything. And so when I told her what I was experiencing, she kind of stopped me in my tracks. And she's got a really lovely French accent that I won't try to do. But she calls me Bonush. And she said, Bonush, you must go in. Like she got that there was something important about that abyss, that void. And I'd been really avoiding it, but I heard her in that moment. I was like, yeah, I need to go in. And she told me, that Eckhart Tolle had found, I guess he calls it like a void or a vacuum or something. She was like, I've heard about this void. You must go in. So I got interested in that. And I was just thinking about everything, jaded about what we were experiencing in there and feeling burnt out and lost. But this thing was really drawing me, the kind of automatic writing that I was doing, the journaling, and then this abyss. And so I found myself in LA in 2016 in, I guess, the end of June. And I was staying at a friend's place and I had the whole place to myself in Marina Del Rey, right on the beach. And it was just this really loud call, like my friend had said that to me, but also my higher self, my guides, again, whatever you want to call it, was basically saying like, you need to stop. what you're doing and go within until you find the truth of who you are. Like, find the truth was kind of the directive. And so I started canceling plans and doing a lot of different meditation practices. I'd really dived into Kriya Yoga in, I guess, like 2008. So when I was 25, and I'd had some initial awakenings then. So I was getting back into the Kriya practices and then just sitting with whatever like somatic feelings were in my body. So I'd do the Kriya practices and then I'd just sit and kind of will myself to go into that abyss more and more each day. And like at times I would try to kind of like jump in, but I couldn't because there were all these like fear barriers. It was like I was really holding myself back. I wanted to go in there, but it was like, but I can't. And
what was the fear?
I mean, it felt like I was going to die and be gobbled up and like, I don't know, like eaten and absorbed by this thing. I don't know. It just felt like I could be destroyed. And I guess it's like an egoic thing of like the ego, when it knows it's heading into a space where maybe it's going to be dissolved a bit, then it wants to hold on for dear life. So that part of me was like, I don't want to die. It was like this space is going to gobble me up. That was kind of the feeling. Yeah. And then just, I would say like a somatic resistance. Every time I went in, it was like this tension, like kind of my whole body would tense and I'd feel the different parts of my torso where all that tension was being held in my muscles. So it was a very physical thing too. And I was doing just kind of like presence practices of sitting with the feelings, noticing the areas where I was holding a lot of tension and kind of like gently willing them to relax, softening. And I was kind of, I would say I was like dropping in deeper and deeper every day. And there was this relaxation that was starting to happen where I was like softer.
When you say dropping in, like dropping into the abyss,
Mm-hmm.
what did it look like anything?
Like an empty space, like infinite space, almost like outer space, but inner space. So it was dark, but also kind of like had all these sparkles of light.
So it was empty, but not empty?
Yeah. Empty, but kind of had energy in it. Definitely had energy in it. Energy and light as well. So like if I could say the colors, I would say it was like a black space with some sparkles, like gold sparkles and the feeling of, intense energy and light as well, which was that Kundalini experience. Because every time I went in, it was like, it was like a very otherworldly, almost like a sci-fi movie of like every time you put your hand through a portal or something, it's like, it was like that.
So, okay. So you were sinking in deeper and deeper every time, you said?
Yeah. And walking on the beach, like just considering everything, considering life and really deepening this feeling of wanting to know the truth of who I was, who I am. And then I got to a point on the 10th day where I was completely willing for it to gobble me up. I was like, I completely want to know the truth. I'm done with this kind of human suffering. And I'm just ready to know, like, who am I really? What am I? And I knew that the answer was in there. I felt it so intuitively. It was calling me, like that vacuum that Eckhart Tolle talks about. So I reached that point where I was willing for it to kill me if that's what it took. Not that I wanted it to, but I was like, okay, if that's what has to be, then that's what has to be. And on the 10th day, just like I'd been meditating throughout the day and walking on the beach and then I had one particular meditation session, I guess it was in the evening. And I just was kind of softening into that space. And it's almost like, I guess, all the work that I'd been doing just built up. And in that moment, it was this total softening of like, surrender. And then I just sat there and I felt no feelings of fear or tension in my body at all. Like I was just total relaxation. It was gentle. It felt like very calm. So I was just sitting there like, And I was interested in it too. I was like, well, that's interesting. Like I didn't realize that I had fear in my body maybe my whole life. I was like, I've never experienced zero feeling of fear. I was like, interesting. And then I went to sleep. Like I didn't think too much of it, but I was like at peace. And then I went to sleep, and I guess it was like at 1 or 2 a.m. I woke up, and it's like my entire body and energy system was filled with, I can just only call it like the light of the cosmos. And I know like people talk about these kinds of things a lot now. I feel like it's more talked about. But back then it was a very visceral experience. Like whoa. I mean, of course I'd heard of people, experiencing light in their body and stuff, but I was like, whoa, like this is really, oh my goodness. And it was the most incredible joy and bliss, very, very tangible through my entire being. Like there wasn't one part in my body that wasn't completely absorbed in that feeling of joy, love, bliss, light. And it came with all these, what I would call now light codes. So I saw it as like math back then. I was like, interesting. Like I could feel and see like these mathematical equations, my whole body, and I knew in that moment, and I don't think I'd heard anyone talk about this, but I knew in that moment that my DNA was being rewired. It's like I just knew that. It was like this, like these light equations through my whole body, and just this massive rush of incredible energy that was also pretty overwhelming. Like it was the deepest joy and bliss and love that I'd ever known, but it was like bursting through my body and chakras and everything. It was like explosions. And I remember thinking of it in terms of, like, I've never been in labor, but people talk about the contractions, and that comes with pain, obviously. And so I was like, this is like not a contraction, but it's like an expansion of joy and bliss, but it's like it's painful. And so I couldn't sit still, and I had to, walk around and let the energy move. I started moving a lot, like, whew, like, gotta let this intense energy move through me. But it completely changed my experience of life. I was like, whoa, I've found everything that I have been looking for in all the personal growth programs and all the meditation and all what we'd been looking for in ESP, NXIVM. And I thought that's what we were looking for in there. I thought that's what we were doing. And so I was really surprised when I started sharing this experience, because I was like, of course you'd share it. This is like, isn't this what we're all like doing? And I started sharing it, and there were a few people who got it and felt it. And then, yeah, like a lot of the higher ranks were, interestingly, well, not now, but like at the time I was like, that's interesting that they're suddenly being really dismissive and punishing and cold with me. Like I'd try to share about this joy, and they would get this like horrified kind of look on their face. Like they didn't know what to do with me. And then I got whispers that they were all, talking really badly about me, of like, Bonnie's lost her mind and like whatever. I mean, all the things that they were saying about me.
I just want to go back for a moment and share with the audience that, so your 10th day that evening, I was in Mexico, in Chihuahua. I was in cartel-controlled territory with a group of people, wondering like, am I going to die? Because like the cartel was walking around with machine guns. And I went to spend the night with a community of people that I had been making this film about. The film is called Encender el Corazón. And I spent the night that night that you were going through the experience, I spent the night in the bed of one of my lead characters that had been murdered by the cartel a few years earlier. And his wife said, no, you can stay in my house. I'm staying in another house. You can stay in the bed. And I realized this is the bed where the cartel came to get him, dragged him out, and murdered him. And so there was this very strange feeling of like mortality that I was experiencing. And I also had this overwhelming sense of like, what have I dragged these people into? Because I was responsible for a lot of people. And like, I didn't really understand how visible the cartel was there. And so I think I had 20 people there, all because I wanted them to come with me, you know, and I realized like, what if they get killed, you know? So there was all this mortality feelings and thoughts. And I didn't have a very good night because I was just dreaming about this stuff. And then the next morning, I realized I needed some establishing shots of the town. The town, I think it was Galeana in Chihuahua. And I took the drone up, and you called me while the drone was up in the air. And I answered the phone and I said, and I think you said, I found it. I think that was the thing you said, I found it. And I was like, shit, I got a drone in the air. I got to keep safe. I said, I'll call you back. And I landed the drone. I think it was around 6:45, 7 in the morning, Chihuahua time. And I landed the drone. I called you back. And then you started telling me, you know, what had happened. That was July 7th, 2016. 7/7. And I just telling the audience, like, there's so much weird stuff going on. And then my experience of then talking to you, of spending time with you, because I think what happened then is I flew back to Albany and you flew back to Albany, I think. Or no, I came to LA.
No, I stayed in LA. Yeah. Maybe
I came
you
to
went
LA.
to Albany. I think you went to Albany maybe for a few days and then you came to LA.
No. I remember now what happened. I went from Mexico straight to LA, and you and I were supposed to go to a wedding back in Mexico, and we said we can't go because like something's happening with you. I wasn't quite sure what was going on. I had a sense of it, but it was like, I think something really profound has happened. And you just had so much energy and so much joy. And it was almost like you seemed kind of detached from all the normal worries, because I was stressed about so much shit. You just seemed completely detached from all the worries. Mm-hmm. And I remember thinking, oh shit, my wife's just become enlightened. Holy shit, now what? You know?
Which it's what you had always been looking for and touching
my whole life
as well. Like you knew that, you knew what that was.
I mean, before we get into like the way, how it went, like when you say awakening, what is that? What is that for you? Well, what was it before? And what was it now that you had that experience?
Before, it was obviously an experience of a lot of fear, a lot of tension, as I said, a lot of like holding on in my body and self-doubt. It came with like a lot of patterns, mental patterns of self-doubt, feeling unworthy, not trusting myself, like really handing over the responsibility to the higher ups in the cult and to Keith as well. So really like not experiencing that joy in myself, not trusting myself, not feeling like I was worthy, like really feeling pretty badly about myself.
Mm. And what was your idea of what enlightenment was then?
I would say it had to do with truth, like the truth of who we are. So a lot of questioning around like, what are we? What is the truth of who we are? And that there was some possibility of finding that, whatever that meant, like experientially. And I definitely had ideas that enlightenment would be like the disappearance or the dissolving of fear and suffering. And so that was like suddenly all of that was dissolved. I was like, whoa. And that's why it was like, I've literally found what I was looking for. Because suddenly all of that was gone. So I found, I feel that really experientially I did find the truth of who I was, which was not all those ideas of who I thought I was, Bonnie and this and that and all the rules and the regulations and everything. it was actually this like empty or full, beautiful space. Like, yeah.
You know, I want to just like a little commentary for a second, because I know people are listening and going, oh, I know what this is. Like, oh, this is, Jesus saved you. That's what happened, or your ancestors came through and took you to another whatever. Like, there's all these interpretations of what this experience is. And I remember us talking about like, what is this? And like, what exactly is Kundalini? The thing that's so interesting is the way you describe this empty abyss that is full of everything. And you and I have talked about that a lot since, the idea, like, remember we went to that, see that movie in LA about black holes?
The Connected Universe or something?
Connected Universe, yeah.
Yeah.
And this is before you had this experience.
No,
and
it was after.
It was after. Oh, it was after. Okay.
Right. It was like right after, a couple of weeks after.
Right after. Yeah. And remember the whole thing was about black holes are not sucking everything in. Black holes is where everything is.
Yeah.
Right? And we were just like, holy
It made so
shit.
much sense. Yeah. I was like, it's all about the black holes. It's like that's source.
Yeah.
Like these nothingness.
And I know I'm just taking a right angle turn here, but it is so interesting. And I think you and I talked about this before, that in many religions, the darkness is evil. The darkness is seen as evil. You stay away from the darkness. You got to go to the light, And yet the pure experience of this thing is there's kind of a darkness there of some kind that is infinite, has no boundaries, is completely empty and void of everything, but full of everything. I just think it's interesting that some religions point us away from that.
Right. Like really stay away from the darkness. But it's like that darkness within is literally the source of all of it. In my experience, like that's the place to go. And I realized like through this whole process that is it very much feels like that's the ultimate fear of humanity. It's like we all have these identity constructs of who we think we are, and we're like holding on to all these things for dear life, all because there's this vacuum, I do believe, like a place where people are just not looking, of like there is this truth of an emptiness inside, a nothingness that's actually terrifying. Like if you're avoiding that creates such a tension, such a resistance of like you're going about your life, but deep down you know that there's this like really scary thing that you're not exploring. So that's like a very profound fear, I think, that a lot of people have. And so, in whatever way works for each person, I think the ultimate freedom is found in going in there, whatever that means. And that might have different symbols for different people in religions and stuff.
Right. And I remember also just you having these rushes of energy that were so overwhelming. It's almost like you stuck your finger in a light socket. And it's later we talked about it, you and I, like about how it's almost like your nervous system couldn't handle the amount of energy coming through you.
Yeah.
And it was overwhelming. I don't remember, you had a lot of heat as well, right?
Yeah, tons of heat, exactly. Like I'd get red in the face as the energy would kind of rise. And it also migraines, it led to a lot of headaches. And I feel it was like where the energy was just trying to rush through, and it would get stuck, in my neck because of whatever structural, postural stuff that I had and still have a bit. Kind of like a heat, this energy rushing that feels like massive life force. And it's interesting because I know you and I have talked about it a bunch of like, when I can see that as life force energy and like recognize that, oh, it's like this, it's Kundalini. It's life force that's rushing through me. Like when I can see that, I get this kind of reverence for it of like, whew, like that's amazing. Whoa. And then I experience it as that joy and that bliss. But because it was so intense, like at so many points, actually not for the first, like, was it 3 months or something?
The first part seemed to be 3 months long, yeah.
Yeah, it was about 3 months where it was pure joy and bliss and like fully open and connected to source and the field and like feeling all of that and grace and like all of that profound.
I mean, I remember you were kind of, to some degree, even to me, unrecognizable, because I couldn't relate to, like, how are you suddenly not afraid of anything? How are you just so joyful? And I remember looking at you sometimes thinking, it's almost like you're floating around.
Yeah, I felt that way. It actually felt like tangibly like I was floating, and like even I'm swaying now as we're talking about it. It's like there's an experience of what I call the field, and it's tangible. Like I can feel it's not just empty space. It's like there's this connection with everything. Yeah, and there is a floating feeling. I felt like gravity worked differently as I was floating through that. Like I didn't need to hold, you know how often, like, I don't know if people experience this, but if we have structural postural stuff, there's actually an experience of trying to hold up our body, like hold up our torso. Like it's like a lot of energy to stay upright or something. And when I'm in that space, and especially in those 3 months, it's like gravity changed and I didn't have to do any of that holding. So it was like this, like kind of, yeah, swaying, floating very, very tangibly, physically through life. And I could feel this tangible connection with everything. Like even as I'd walk down the street, it's like this kind of like floating, I could feel the people, you know, in a beautiful way, but it's like everything was connected in a really graceful way.
What was your experience of other people who were very stressed and worried, including me, about whatever?
No, you were moved by it because you knew that this was what we'd been looking for. So you got it. And I guess now you're telling me you had like various fears and things about it.
Actually, one of the fears, honestly, I had is losing you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think I told you that one time. Like, oh, she's so far beyond me now. Like I've lost her. Because here I am with all my petty fears and worries about everything.
And my experience with attachments changed a lot too. So we had that kind of like joint attachment, and suddenly I was like, I mean, the love was totally still there. I'm sure you felt that, but yeah, the attachment changed. But the people, I would, so in general, I would look around the world, like even going to coffee shops and walking around, and I could just feel how checked out people were, checked out and in their head and like not aware of who they really were, really like lost in a dream of, you know, fear and tension and stress. Like even if I'd see happy people on the street, there was still this feeling of like they didn't know who they were. And then looking around in the cult, like soon after that, we went to V Week. And
for everyone to know, V Week was the every year we went away to upstate New York, Lake George, took over the YMCA for 10 days for the cult leader's birthday. And it was supposed to be fun, but it was weird. What you were saying.
V Week, oh my God. I hated that in the end. It was just like such an obligation to go there and put your life on hold and do whatever they said you had to do. But I had checked out of the cult by that point. I was like, I'm free of this. And I was planning my exit. I was like, I still didn't know about the dark stuff, but I was like, I was on my way out. Because I was listening to my intuition.
July 7th is when your awakening happened, and we were at V Week the end of August into September.
Yeah. So by that point, I was really listening to my intuition. My intuition was super online. It was like all the psychic connections and everything were just like, whoa, I can see. And so I was just listening to myself and trusting my own guidance and planning my exit. Still not getting the depth of the horrible darkness that was going on, but I could feel the tension. So you asked, like, what was my experience of people's stress? At V Week, it just felt like absolutely everything was, like everyone was being crushed. Like there was such a tension and a pressure and a control that was causing everyone to feel so tense and uptight. And then they'd get up on the stage and talk about joy and like all the things that they'd found. And I was like, nah, that's not like it it didn't ring true anymore. Because I was sitting there feeling this like profound, like complete joy. And then I look at, you know, certain people get up on the stage and they were just like obviously not experiencing that. And so it started to shatter the illusion of like, okay, well, I guess that's not what this was about. That was
And
like
then
the
just
breaking. Yeah.
and then just let's pick up where you were talking about how people were responding to you.
So there were some people, I would say like a handful of people, just friends who I'd been talking to about what I was going through, and they kind of knew like what was going on. And they were really moved. Like I'd go and meet them down by the lake or something, and we'd just talk about spirituality and, you know, what I had found and what was resonating for them, like that they knew there was truth, and they would share like certain things. So these beautiful connections, like people really got it. Man, I remember the presence of those conversations. It was like, vroom, of like all the illusions that they'd been holding on to, all the ways they'd been running from themselves. And finally it was like something woke up just in talking about it. So that was profound. And then the higher ranks, for the most part, were like ridiculing me. I could feel it. I was getting word, like some of the kind of more friendly people that I was talking to would come back to me and say, Bonnie, they're like bitching about you. And by that point, I wasn't surprised. I was like, yep, guess that's kind of how it goes around here.
But it didn't hurt you in that state.
No, not at all.
Hmm.
I was like, well, let them bitch, you know. Oh, well. But as I discovered actually what was going on later, like after V-Week, as the months went on, and I started to see that you weren't really allowed to leave, and there were various threats, and then I started opening my mind to like reading some of the information on the Frank report and stuff about really what might have been going on. And like, as I started to gather information and actually take it in and take in like the horror, then the contraction started to come back in. And it was this mix of like, I was still processing all the Kundalini in my system. I was still having those explosions, but the joy started to be affected by the trauma of realizing like what I had been a part of and the situation that I was in and the threats. I started to like fear for myself and for you. And
for anybody like in the audience going like, what the hell are you talking about? Look up NXIVM. Just Google NXIVM. Watch HBO's The Vow, 2 seasons, 16 episodes. It was all over the press. That's the darkness that Bonnie's describing of what was actually underneath. So it was sort of the honeymoon period for like 3 months.
Yeah.
And then the realization of the darkness.
Yeah. And of course it was different after that because I'd experienced that so deeply that I had such a contrast. Like I knew that was there. I even knew that I always could find that again. It's like, it's very different once you've been there and you know what exists. But because so much nervous system stuff got triggered, like it just, and actually I think Kundalini does it. It can bring up all that stuff anyway. It's like this clearing. So whatever's stuck and locked in your system is going to be brought up so that you can shine a light on it and help it unravel and release. So it was like just a shit show of everything coming up and an absolute horror. And like my body was so filled with like, oh my God, like all this trauma. And I knew that joy and bliss was still there available on some level. But with all that trauma in my system, I didn't even want to meditate anymore at a certain point. It's like I couldn't sit still. And so I actually think looking back, had I taken like, let's say an hour every day to meditate and allow that stuff to process in presence, like just to sit with it and let the energy move and stuff, I actually think I could have stayed with a much deeper connection to that joy during that time. But because I didn't, it's like I had this resistance to go back in and I was just totally focused on the horror. It's like I didn't get to experience that joy anymore, even though I knew it was there, but it was like, I'm just like flooded with trauma.
You know, I just wanted to go back to the light codes and the DNA thing because I was watching something recently, and you and I have spoken about this before. I was watching something recently about a guy that took DMT. It was an animated thing. I have to find it. And the DMT experience is very much like what you described, of like the light codes and things. Like people that take DMT see a lot of the same stuff, mathematical stuff, geometrical stuff. It's like the veil is suddenly pulled down and they see reality for what it actually is. And they realize, holy shit, this thing I've been calling life is actually a complete fabrication in a dream.
Right.
And they feel all these changes. But what's interesting about DMT from what I've heard is like you have that awareness, but then you come back just to the normal self. And you and I have talked about how sometimes some of those, substance experiences are like an unearned quote unquote enlightenment, because like you haven't earned it. And then the thing I was thinking about was this Kundalini idea has been around for thousands and thousands of years. Not talked about in the Western world, not talked about in medicine, not talked about in psychology. If anything, it's spoken about as schizophrenia or psychosis or a chemical imbalance. But Kundalini has been spoken about in the East for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. I think the thing that I didn't know that I learned from you, because just to back up to what I thought enlightenment was, I thought enlightenment was happily ever after.
Yeah, no, I did too. I didn't expect it to turn into trauma. I was like, this is it forever. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, everything's fine. You have no fear anymore. Like basically, I guess my vision of enlightenment was psychopathy, basically, which is like not a good vision. It never occurred to me like, no, if you unlock the Kundalini, the pipes have got shit in them, not shit. The pipes have got stuff in them, and all the stuff has to come out. And all the stuff is all the trauma, all the belief systems, all the everything that has to come out. So it makes sense that it's going to amplify everything, because in some ways, almost like it forces you to address it.
Totally. Yeah, it's a cleansing.
Right.
Like Adyashanti, the spiritual teacher, Adyashanti, who I was listening to at that point, actually, to try to make sense of what had happened. He called it fierce grace. And, often when we use the term grace, we think of like, it's peaceful and it's easy. But like the way he described it, fierce grace, it's like, no, it will like sweep through relentlessly to clear whatever needs to be cleared.
Right. And just to go back to talking about you being the trigger for the whole thing falling apart. And I think the reason I say that is because your perspective shift was so fast. It was like suddenly you were just pulled out of the matrix, and suddenly you saw the matrix for what it was. I hadn't seen it yet. Most people hadn't yet. There was a wave of defectors before that had seen it.
Yeah.
Years and years before 2008, I think it was. It's almost 9 years before. But you had a perspective suddenly where you could see the way things worked.
Yeah.
And there were a couple of interesting things is it began infecting me, because I also began to think, wait, this is not right. This is not right. Even though I was so loyal still. There was something else I wanted to say about that. Oh, their reaction to you was very telling.
Right. Even for you, right? You were like, hang on a second.
Shocked.
What are we doing here?
Yeah. Like you'd found the thing that I'd been looking for my whole life. I thought that's what we said we were doing. And suddenly everybody hated you and was trying to separate us and convince me you were like a horrible human being. And I'm like, what the fuck? It's almost like Jonathan Livingston Seagull, and all the seagulls are saying shit about, Jonathan. I'm like, what the fuck is going on here?
Right.
And that was very telling, because I thought, this is just mean.
Yeah. And for you, you were seeing very clearly what the other people were doing. And it just, that hold that Keith had on you had to be broken down. So that was your process of having to, see through that to free yourself and really get out. But you were totally seeing that it wasn't right. Like,
no, I just kept on thinking, they were designing entire intensives around you, like 8-day intensives to convince me that you were a bad person. And I was like, this is just weird.
Right.
It's so interesting. I think about, I think if any Christians are listening to the story, you'll find this interesting. I do think about the story of Jesus. And I do think about like he began to talk about shit that was going on. And the Romans got pissed, but also the priests got pissed. Like, they killed the motherfucker.
You know, truth is very upsetting to people. And actually, one thing that I realized, I really understood the structure of this at that time. I was like, the control that's been holding my life in place and keeping me stuck in this situation, the control that they had over me was completely broken, because once you find who you really are, you find that joy, that bliss. For me anyway, it shattered all those feelings of unworthiness, and the unworthiness was where they had their hooks in. So they couldn't control me anymore because that unworthiness had evaporated.
Yes. It's funny because on the other channel, WTF is on my mind, I talk about, because people say, well, how do you avoid, toxic people? And I'm more and more convinced the more you find yourself, it's not like you have to avoid them. You just see it very clearly.
Yeah.
And they can't get their hooks into you, because if you have low self-esteem, you have insecurity, you have all these things that they can get their hooks into you. And in that 3-month period, you just seem to have none of that.
Yeah, there were no hooks.
Yeah.
Yeah, none at all. So I think that even though then I went into that phase of like really intense trauma and we were like at war and everything, I do think that a lot was evaporated in those 3 months of like the grace did dissolve a lot of that stuff of how I'd been living my life and hooked into that.
And also what happened, you were very courageous during the war.
Yeah.
I mean, you were like a spitfire.
Yeah. And I often reflect on that. Like before that shift, I would not have had that courage at all. I didn't have that strength. I didn't have that conviction or that connection to myself. And so for sure, like that fueled me to know with certainty what was going on and to have that conviction to be like, this is wrong. I did not have that strength before.
I know that, everybody has an opinion about what they think happened with you. You went to hell, you went to heaven, you met Jesus, whatever the
Delusion was a big one.
Mm-hmm. Delusion, that you're delusional. Schizophrenia, DID, there's all these theories about what happened to you. Because you also went through, it wasn't fun. I mean, the first 3 months was amazing.
Right.
And it has not been fun for years after that. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, my understanding of Kundalini awakenings is that there's different depths to them. And so like sometimes, and actually I had one when I was 25, when I started doing Kriya Yoga, I dropped into that space for the first time for 3 days. And so that was a big one. But then the energy of it resolved pretty quickly. But this one was like so deep and so profound that it's almost 10 years later now. It's 9.5 years later. And only just now am I starting to feel like the energy is reaching stability. Like, and not even yet. Like it's still there. It's just finding stability. So yeah, like almost 10 years of processing. I do believe that if I'd kept meditating during that time and allowing the energy to process, I would have moved through it more quickly, I think. But to have that intense awakening and activate all that energy and then be hit with that amount of trauma, like for the people who have seen The Vow, you'll know that it was like extreme to move through that kind of trauma. I'm sure that made it much harder for that to process and added years. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think there's so much more to talk about. I mean, I am curious for both of our audiences, to maybe they can share, some of what they're interested in hearing about, because there's so much to the story that still needs to be told.
Yeah.
But Bonnie and I have been on a journey since that moment of really trying to understand, what that was. And then also, she's had more experiences. I've had a bunch of experiences, things that we're happy to talk about.
And I want to talk about your early experiences.
Yeah.
Your early awakenings in Africa.
Yeah. And also something we want to talk about, maybe next episode or after that, is like, where you get attached to a particular symbol that you think is the thing.
Yes.
Bonnie came up with something the other day where she said, there's this doorway to divinity, but the problem is people get attached to the door.
Yeah.
Not to the actual thing.
And initially I thought that it was Kriya Yoga because that had activated in me for those 3 days and changed my perception back then. And then I got attached to the cult thinking that was the thing. And we start to think that the doorway is the be all and end all, like ultimate. That's it.
I mean, I got attached to the place that I spent time growing up in South Africa, in the bush, with my grandparents. I spent time with my grandparents in the bush, and I had a bunch of, awakening experiences. And I became convinced that the bush is what caused it. The bush was the symbol for it, and I had to get back to the bush. So I would dream every night about, I have to get back there, I have to get back there, I have to get back there. Years later, I went back there. The place was sold. There was squatters living in the house. And none of the feelings were there. And I was like, it's not the bush. And then a couple of years ago, when Bonnie and I were living in Portugal, I was doing a bunch of meditation work. We'll talk about all this more, but I was on a bus on the way from the coast to Lisbon doing some of these sort of meditations, and suddenly it just popped, and it's like a veil just pulled aside. And for hours, I walked around Lisbon thinking, holy shit. And that is still there. It's like Bonnie says, it's not gone. It's just how aware am I of it, and can I dip into it? So there's tons of things we want to talk about,
and really supernatural, like crazy, like energetic, magical stuff, like unexplainable stuff as well.
Yeah. So guys, put in the comments, the stuff that you're really interested in hearing about. We are just going to be having these chats now and again. I mean, Bonnie has her podcast, I have my podcast. We're going to be interviewing other people. Sometimes we'll do solo things. And sometimes I think we're just going to chat about this stuff because we are obsessed with this stuff now. We want to make a film about it. We'll talk about that in the future. But this stuff just consumes us, what this experience is and what's available.
Yeah.
Right. So thanks for listening, everybody. And we will be back with you together soon. Thank you.